Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Oliver.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Welcome to Science in Easy English.
Does the moon really affect your mood?
So imagine being locked inside like a completely windowless underground room for days.
Right, like a bunker.
Yeah, exactly. There are no clocks on the wall, there's no sunlight creeping under the door, and obviously absolutely no moonlight coming in. You are completely isolated from the outside world.
Sounds a little intense.
It is. But here's the crazy part. Even in that isolated room, without fail, your body somehow knows exactly when a full moon is hovering in the night sky above you.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And your own biology will secretly steal like 20 minutes of your sleep.
Oh, wow. That is wild.
Right. So today we are looking at the hard science of the lunar effect. We've pulled together this incredibly diverse stack of sources for this deep dive.
We really have. I mean, we are covering everything from ancient cultural lore to massively scaled modern psychiatric data.
Yeah, and we've got indigenous sleep studies in there, and even some marine biology, which is fascinating.
It's a huge range.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is pretty simple, actually. We are going to separate the folklore from the actual physics and find out if human biology is, secretly tethered to the moon.
I love that because, I mean, for centuries, humans have looked up at the night sky and basically just assumed that glowing orb was pulling our strings.
Oh, for sure.
It's baked so deeply into our psychology. We hear it all the time from hospital workers or police officers.
Oh, yeah, they totally brace themselves for a chaotic night the moment they see a full moon.
Exactly. And the surveys from our sources actually back that up in a pretty startling way.
How so?
Well, up to 81% of mental health professionals actively believe the moon causes a spike in illness or erratic behavior.
81%. That is massive.
I know. 81% of trained clinical experts think the lunar cycle dictates human stability.
I mean, it is even baked into our language, right? The word lunacy literally comes from the Latin word for moon. There's just this deeply ingrained cultural belief that full moons cause absolute chaos.
Right, which sounds incredibly validating for anyone listening who has ever felt a little, off doing a full moon.
Yeah.
But that belief hits a solid brick wall the moment you crash it into the reality of modern big data.
Oh, the big data completely destroys it.
It really does.
Yeah.
When researchers pull back and look at massive population-level statistics, the entire narrative just shatters.
Yeah, let's talk about the French study.
Right. So there was a retrospective study in France that analyzed nearly 70,000 psychiatric emergency consultations.
Almost 70,000.
Yeah, a huge data set. And they mapped those hospital admissions directly against the phases of the moon. And they found absolutely zero statistical correlation.
Zero.
The lines on the graph just did not connect at all.
And it wasn't just an isolated finding in France either. A Swiss study looked at almost 18,000 cases. An Indian study looked at a similar massive data set, and every single one of them found zero connection between lunar phases and psychiatric emergencies, suicides, or severe trauma.
The population data is just entirely flat.
And some of the research even points in the opposite direction, which is hilarious.
Yes. Like the study published in the Journal of Emerging Investigators. They analyzed nearly 6,000 psychiatric patients and actually found a negative correlation.
Wait, a negative correlation? So, like, fewer people?
Exactly. Admissions were significantly lower during the full moon and the gibbous phase.
Let's quickly define the gibbous phase for anyone trying to visualize a moon chart.
Good idea.
That is the bulging, sort of asymmetrical phase just a few days before the moon becomes completely full.
Right. And during that time, hospital admissions actually dropped.
And there was another study out of Finland that found homicides decreased by 15% on full moon nights.
Wow.
So if millions of data points say the lunar effect is a total myth, why do so many doctors and nurses swear the emergency room is crazier on a full moon?
It's a great question.
I think it comes down to a classic psychological trap. It's like, well, think of it like buying a bright red car.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Right. The day after you drive it off the lot, suddenly you see red cars at every single stoplight. You think, wow, everyone bought a red car today.
When really they were always there.
Exactly. The scientific term for that is an illusory correlation. It's heavily driven by confirmation bias.
Right. So a nurse has a terrible, chaotic shift at the hospital, happens to look out the window, sees a giant glowing orb in the sky, and their brain instantly forms a causal link.
They think, it's a full moon, that explains it.
Exactly. What they fail to register are all the equally chaotic, totally overwhelming nights when the sky was cloudy or it was a new moon.
Right, simply because there was no obvious celestial scapegoat to blame.
You also have to factor in the placebo effect here.
Oh, for sure. Or expectancy bias.
Right, which is a really powerful psychological force.
Right.
If a society collectively expects the moon to alter moods, people might subconsciously act differently.
Or they might just perceive the exact same events as being more chaotic than they actually are.
Exactly. So at a broad population level, the idea that the moon turns us into werewolves or floods the ER is scientifically dead on arrival.
Okay, and this is a big but if the overarching data proves this is entirely fake, why do so many individuals still swear they feel something shifting inside them?
Well, our sources point out a fundamental flaw in how we look at statistics. When you average out tens of thousands of people, you completely erase the highly sensitive outliers.
Averages hide the individual.
Precisely. And this brings us to some truly groundbreaking work by Dr. Thomas Ware. He's a scientist emeritus at the National Institute of Mental Health.
Right, the longitudinal studies.
Yes.
Right.
So he conducted these longitudinal studies, meaning he tracked the same subjects over a very, very long period of time. And he focused on patients with rapid cycling bipolar disorder.
He studied 17 patients, right?
17 patients.
And one case from his research is just incredibly striking. He followed a 51-year-old man who meticulously tracked his mood and his sleep every single day for 3.3 years.
That is over 1,000 days of continuous self-reported data.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the pattern that emerged was undeniable. This patient experienced massive, sudden mood shifts, going from severely depressed to highly manic.
And those shifts perfectly synchronized with the 29.5-day lunar phase.
It's wild.
The precision of his biological rhythm was just astonishing. Near the full moon, this patient's sleep shortened drastically and his mood elevated into a positive or manic state.
And then the opposite happened, right?
Exactly. As the cycle approached the new moon, his sleep lengthened considerably and his mood crashed back down into a severe depressive state.
Okay, let's unpack this, because my immediate reaction is how.
Right. What's the mechanism?
Yeah. How does a rock hovering roughly 238,000 miles away physically trigger a manic episode in a human being?
It sounds impossible.
Right. I mean, unless these patients are sleeping completely exposed in an open field under the moonlight, which we know they weren't, how does this happen?
Well, think of it like two out-of-sync metronomes sitting on a table.
Okay, two metronomes.
Right. One metronome is ticking to the rhythm of the sun, and the other is ticking to the rhythm of the moon.
Oh, I see.
That metronome analogy perfectly illustrates the concept of circadian pacemakers. Our bodies contain an internal biological clock, like a pacemaker, that regulates everything.
From when we release sleep hormones to when we feel hungry.
Exactly. And for most of humanity, that pacemaker is firmly locked onto the 24-hour solar day.
Right. The sun rises, our body temperature goes up, the sun sets, our melatonin increases.
But the moon operates on a slightly different schedule. A lunar tidal day is approximately 24.8 hours long.
So it's just a little bit longer than the solar day.
Right. And what Dr. Weir discovered is that in these highly sensitive bipolar patients, their internal biological clock somehow uncouples from the normal solar day.
It just breaks away.
Yeah, it breaks its tether to the sun's 24-hour rhythm and physically latches onto the 24.8-hour lunar tidal day.
Wow, so you essentially have the solar rhythm and the lunar rhythm running simultaneously inside the exact same body.
Yes. And because those two biological metronomes are running at slightly different speeds, they eventually fall completely out of phase and clash.
And that clash is what causes the mood swing.
Exactly. That massive rhythmic collision inside the body's internal timing system is what triggers the extreme manic depressive cycles.
That is mind-blowing. It really suggests we have this hidden biological receiver.
It does.
But, I mean, that extreme reaction is isolated to individuals with specific psychiatric conditions, right?
You would think so.
Right, or so I thought. Because the deepest dive into these sources reveals that the moon is actively stealing sleep from everyone,
Everyone.
including you, listening right now.
Yes, and we can actually trace this universal effect back to a 2013 retrospective lab study by chronobiologist Christian Kiyoshin.
Okay, tell us about this one.
So his team analyzed individuals sleeping in tightly controlled, completely windowless sleep laboratories.
Windowless, so absolutely zero moonlight penetrating these rooms.
Zero moonlight. And here's the kicker. The participants had no idea the study had anything to do with the moon.
They were totally blind to the premise.
Exactly. Yet, around the time of the full moon, these people took 5 minutes longer just to fall asleep.
Even without seeing it.
Right. And they lost 20 minutes of their total sleep duration.
That's the 20 minutes we mentioned at the start?
Yep. And it gets deeper. Their deep sleep, the restorative NREM sleep, where your brain actually repairs itself, plummeted by 30%.
30%. That's a huge drop in sleep quality.
It is. And their bodies physically produce less melatonin, the hormone responsible for making you feel tired.
And again, all of this occurred while they were sealed inside a sterile, windowless box.
Exactly. And to prove this is not just some anomaly of a clinical laboratory setting, we can look at a 2021 study by researchers Horacio de la Iglesia and Leandro Casaraghi.
Oh, right, the one in Argentina.
Yes. They took their research out into the real world. They studied indigenous Toba and Combe communities in Argentina.
And what's cool about this study is the different environments they looked at.
Right. They observed groups living with absolutely no electricity, groups with a small amount of artificial light, and then compared them to people living in a heavily lit, modern urban center like Seattle.
So from totally off-grid to full city lights. And the results were completely universal, weren't they?
Completely universal. Across the board, regardless of their environment, all of the groups went to bed later, sometimes by up to 30 minutes, and slept less.
They lost up to 58 minutes of sleep in the days leading up to the full moon.
Almost a full hour. And it's not even just humans. Even captive TD monkeys, which were housed in laboratories completely shielded from outside light, exhibited disrupted sleep cycles.
And their restlessness aligned perfectly with gravimetric lunar peaks.
Exactly.
Let's clearly define what a gravimetric lunar peak is, just so we're all on the same page.
Sure. It is the specific window of time when the moon's gravitational pull on the Earth is at its absolute strongest due to its orbital position. What's fascinating here is that by looking at windowless underground labs and artificially lit cities where the streetlights are completely drowning out the night sky, we have entirely eliminated light as the trigger.
Right, because the sleep disruption happens even when moonlight is completely absent.
Exactly. That points us toward a variable that is completely invisible: gravity.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How does gravity actually talk to our biology?
It's a great question.
I mean, if marine life uses gravity and tides to regulate their existence, and humans are basically, what, up to 78% water?
Uh-oh, I know what you're going to ask.
Are we just walking bags of seawater? Is the moon's gravity literally sloshing the water around in our brains and keeping us awake?
Well, while that is a highly entertaining visual, the physics simply do not support it.
Oh, man. Really?
Yeah, sorry. The gravitational pull on the relatively tiny amount of water inside a single human body is infinitesimally weak. It cannot create an internal physical tide.
So it's not the water sloshing around.
No, the mechanism is not the water itself. It actually involves electromagnetism and genetics.
Okay, electromagnetism.
Right. So the moon's gravity pulls on the Earth's oceans, creating semi-diurnal tides, which happen twice a day, and spring neap cycles.
Let's translate spring neap cycles for a moment.
Go for it.
A spring neap cycle happens roughly twice a month when the gravitational pull of the sun, the moon, and the Earth align to create massive, extreme swings in the tides.
Yes, and these massive movements of millions of tons of conductive salt water actually alter the Earth's local magnetic fields.
Oh, wow. So the moving ocean changes the magnetic field.
Exactly. They create subtle electromagnetic and gravimetric fluctuations. And for many species on this planet, sensing those fluctuations is an evolutionarily conserved trait. It is a biological imperative for survival.
Which marine life is incredibly in tune with,
Oh,
obviously.
totally.
Our sources show that entire coral reefs will time their massive reproductive spawning events based on these cycles.
And oysters physically open and close their shells to the exact rhythm of the tides.
And the craziest part is they will continue to do so even if you take them out of the ocean and place them in a tank in the middle of a landlocked continent.
Right. Because they're feeling the gravity, not just the water.
There is even a specific type of marine midge, an insect called Cluniomarinus, that strictly times its emergence and mating by the moon's gravimetric pull.
It's all connected. And humans evolved from ancient marine ancestors. We still carry fragments of that ancient genetic hardware buried inside ourselves.
And the key to unlocking how we process these invisible forces lies in something called the CLOCK gene,
Yes, the CLOCK gene.
discovered by Dr. Joseph Takahashi at UT Southwestern.
Right. The CLOCK gene is essentially the master circadian gene. It is the core piece of genetic code that runs the internal timing of our cells,
So it's like our biological stopwatch.
basically. But what Dr. Takahashi and his team discovered is that in human beings, this specific gene has evolved unique extracircadian functions.
Extra circadian, so it does more than just track time.
Right. It does not just act as a stopwatch for sleep, it actively promotes advanced brain connectivity.
How does it do that?
The CLOCK gene directs the growth of more dendrites and spines in the cerebral cortex, which are the physical structures our neurons use to communicate with one another.
Wait, so this ancient biological timer, which might have originally evolved to help our distant oceanic ancestors track the shifting tides, was essentially co-opted by human evolution.
Yep.
We used that exact same genetic machinery to build a more complex, highly connected brain.
It appears so. The deep-seated genetic architecture is likely the reason human cognition and our sleep-wake cycles remain so uniquely sensitive to these ancient lunar timing.
Because the hardware is literally built into our brain's communication network.
Exactly. We have biological receivers built into the very structure of our DNA that are still tuned to a frequency we no longer consciously recognize.
Which brings up a massive question for you, the listener. If you have this intricate, built-in lunar clock ticking away inside your genetics, why don't you notice it during your day-to-day life?
Right, why aren't we all consciously tracking the tides?
Yeah. Why aren't we adjusting our schedules based on the moon's gravity?
Because our modern lifestyle is actively jamming the signal.
Jamming the signal. And this is perfectly illustrated by the work of chronobiologist Charlotte Forster.
Oh, her study is incredible.
It really is. She conducted a massive long-term study looking at women's menstrual cycles, analyzing an incredible 50 years of generational data.
50 years.
50 years of data. And when she mapped it all out, she found a very distinct, severe breaking point in the timeline.
Yeah. When reviewing the historical data prior to the year 2010, women's cycles synchronized significantly with the phases of the moon.
But then, immediately after 2010, that biological alignment drastically weakened across the entire population.
So what happened around 2010?
The global explosion of smartphones and high-energy blue light-emitting LEDs. Exactly. We essentially decided to flood our eyes and our brains with artificial daylight 24 hours a day.
And blue light is aggressively disruptive to our circadian rhythms. It suppresses the brain's production of melatonin far more effectively than an old incandescent bulb or a gas lamp ever did.
So by staring at these screens, we have effectively blinded our internal biological clocks to the subtle, natural cues of the moon.
We really have. But the biological sync isn't totally dead.
No. The study found that there is exactly one time of year when the moon fights back against our technology and actually wins.
Right. The only time this synchronization still strongly appears in modern post-2010 data is during the month of January.
Why January?
During that specific time of year, the Earth, the sun and the moon, are positioned in their orbits to create the highest possible gravimetric forces.
So the gravity is just cranked up to the max.
Exactly. Those gravitational pulls peak at a level so intense that they are momentarily strong enough to override our screen time and forcefully pull our biology back into its natural rhythm.
That is just incredible. The moon is literally overpowering our iPhones.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see a growing subconscious societal awareness that we are wildly out of sync with our environment.
People definitely feel it.
They do. And this is exactly why concepts like chrononutrition, which is timing your meals to align with your natural circadian rhythms, or cycle syncing for workouts and diets, are exploding in popularity.
Right. People are deeply realizing that modern technology has fractured their natural biological rhythms.
And they are actively trying to manually reclaim them.
So what does this all mean?
Let's bring it all together.
It means we are living in a state of profound irony. The smartphone or computer you might be using to listen to this deep dive right now
The glowing screen you probably stare at right before you try to go to sleep.
is the exact device that is drowning out a 4 billion-year-old celestial rhythm ticking away inside your cells.
It's wild to think about. And look, at a massive general population level, the moon is not going to fundamentally alter society.
Right.
And it certainly isn't the reason the local hospital is having a chaotic night. The big data permanently disproves the dramatic werewolf-style myths.
But at a microscopic, genetic, and deeply individual level, the moon's gravity and its cycles are absolutely still present.
They really are.
They are subtly pushing and pulling on your sleep architecture, your hormones, and your underlying moods.
So on a practical level, it is highly advisable to practice extra vigilant sleep hygiene in the days leading up to a full moon.
Definitely. Put the phone away an hour earlier. Make your bedroom as dark as physically possible.
Because whether you consciously register it or not, your own ancient biology is preparing to fight your ability to sleep.
And that leads us to one final thing for you to think about.
A little perspective shift.
Yeah. We spent this entire deep dive looking at the 20 to 60 minutes of sleep you inevitably lose during a full moon as a disorder.
Right. We view it as an annoyance, a disruption that needs to be fixed with melatonin gummies or, heavier blinds.
But this raises a vital question based on the evolutionary data.
What if this lunar insomnia isn't a glitch in our system?
Okay, I like where this is going.
Think about our ancient ancestors living in the wild hundreds of thousands of years before the invention of electric street lamps or flashlights.
The nights would have been pitch black.
Exactly. A bright full moon provided the absolute only natural illumination they had in the darkness. It was the only time they could safely hunt, gather, socialize, or migrate at night without being completely blind and vulnerable to predators.
Wow. Which completely flips the script on how we view sleep.
It really does. What if that restlessness you feel before a full moon is actually an ancient, hardwired evolutionary superpower?
A survival mechanism permanently coded into your DNA, telling you to wake up and take advantage of the rare light.
And we are just mistakenly trying to cure it.
That is something to think about the next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling, wide awake, while the moon shines outside your window.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.